Hey girl, what you gonna do tonight? I've got my mama's car keys and you've got a ticket to ride.
Hello, and welcome to Your Favorite Flick, a podcast where each episode we celebrate a movie that my guests love. We aren't here to be critics, we're here to be fans. This episode is coming at you a day late, and for that I apologize. Not production problems per se, but producer problems, as I was a bit laid up with vertigo when I should have been editing. Producer me will be giving editor me a real talking to, don't you worry. Today, Barrett Landen is back. Barrett is our official car guy here at YFF, so who better to talk James Bond with? It's Skyfall, which Barrett and I agree is easily the best Bond film of our lifetimes and just maybe the best of all time. We talk about the Bond tropes and how they are brilliantly handled here in ways that feel respectful of the tradition without feeling bound by them. But this movie is also one of the more thematically rich action flicks ever made, and we dive into what it has to say about, to pick a few themes, loyalty, aging, and mortality. This is one of those conversations where I learn more about what I think about a beloved movie by hearing what Barrett thinks about it. You can't ask for better than that in my book. Barrett Landen, welcome back to the show.
Bradley Glazer, I am so freaking excited. I've been waiting the weeks to come back. So the day's finally here.
I love hearing it. For anybody who hasn't checked it out yet, Barrett did a terrific episode on Uncle Buck. We're both huge John Candy fans, so was thrilled to get to have that conversation. And now he's swinging back for a very different movie in Skyfall.
I think we were talking about this after we closed in Uncle Buck, and we were saying, okay, let's talk. You're asking what movies I've seen recently. I said, I'm going through the old catalog, like Dr. No, and going through the old Bond movies. And we both landed on Skyfall being like one of our favorites ever. Not just Bond movie, but one of our favorite action movies of all time. So it was naturally a great kind of secondary episode topic.
The first thing I took in my notes, and I'll grant you there's a number of movies I would say this for, but when I'm watching Skyfall, I'm thinking to myself, oh, this is just the greatest movie ever. Like, how could anything be better than Skyfall?
I was thinking the same thing. And when I was rewatching it this weekend, one of the things that does stand out from a lot of the Bond movies is that it's not just an action movie. It's not surreal gadgetry, surreal villains, and world-ending scenarios and heroes. It's more, there's raw character development, there's vulnerabilities, there's a lot of things that they explore in the characters, I think, in this movie that hasn't previously been done in a lot of Bond movies.
Well, let's dive right into character, and I guess we'll start with James Bond, right? He tends to be the star of any Bond movie, though there's some question as to whether he's the star of this one. But let's start with old James.
I think there's a rawness to his character, a vulnerability, but also a failure right at the beginning, right? You have this illusion that he's killed in the first 15 minutes, the first scene in Turkey. So, like, well, this is the first time Bond's ever been killed off. So what's going to happen here? So I
Right,
think from the
did they run like a big con on us in all the advertising saying it's Daniel Craig again, and in fact, it's going to be a different Bond coming in or something?
Yeah, and it's like, well, this is a new way to introduce a new Bond, I guess. It's starting off with failure. And I think that's what's kind of unique about this movie, as the first build up through the first character arcs and plot lines is all about failure and obsolescence and aging, and is he even the right tool for the job considering the world's moved on?
But not just does it start with failure, but this movie's marked with failure or major setbacks all the way through it.
When you think about all the key scenes, Shanghai and the cinematography in here, and like a lot of the play and lighting is all around paralleling character development throughout the movie. And that's what I think is so cool about it.
I really noted this time the use of shadow throughout the movie. And especially Ray Fiennes has a line at one point about you can't live in the shadows anymore. I'm slightly misquoting that. And I just thought that was intentionally ironic in we see Bond and we see others in shadow so much in this movie.
We were talking about our appreciation of Roger Deakins, the cinematographer, but so much of that plays into plot development, character development throughout the movie. And you look at Shanghai as like modernity, it's like cold. There's a lot of play on shadows and bright colors and like modern design. And then he's sitting in this backdrop as a obsolete kind of Cold War era hero and fails again. Instead of getting down to, hey, who's really behind buying and releasing this list of covert ops or operatives around the world? Who's behind this? So he kills the guy and doesn't get the information. And they still assassinate the person in the other building who we don't really know, the plot line there. But again, it shows that he's too late, doesn't complete his mission, and he's in this modern new world that surpassed him.
You bring up we don't know who the other person is who gets assassinated. There's such a brutal edge to this movie. I think coming into that, we're expecting Bond to stop the assassin, right? Before he does it. And Bond straight up waits until after he takes the shot. He has the option of going earlier, but he's trying to go when the guy's going to be most distracted. And then later he lets the woman that he's ostensibly trying to rescue get, when I say lets her get killed, it's not like he chooses for her to be killed, but it's a consequence.
And then it becomes back to the coldness of his character, where he said, "That's a waste of good old scotch." It's just such a cold line to deliver.
What strikes me here too, so of course, he's relatively on the old side when he takes the role, even in Casino Royale. But I feel like Casino Royale doesn't make a big deal of his being older. Whereas this movie, his age and his mortality are really a huge factor. And that continues through the Craig run. There had been old Bonds before, like Roger Moore was certainly an old dude, especially by the end of it, but they tried to make him look young. How does that age and sense of mortality with Bond factor into to how you appreciate this?
You're right. It's like as he progresses in each movie, you could slowly see that he's aging into obsolescence. He's still there. He's still able to add value, rescue the vulnerable person, get the villain, solve the challenge at the end of the movie. But you could tell that like his drinking, his hard life is catching up with him. This lifestyle, like the double O lifestyle, you don't last long. So you start to see that vulnerability here, and then you see it in M as well. The constant comments about how her style of protecting the country and protecting the world is no longer valid. She's messed up. She's missed things. Silva is another example, like the main villains. How did you let this happen and then come back to bite us?
Let's jump on to Judi Dench's performance as M. When I was kind of half jokingly saying Bond's maybe not the main character in this one, you know the movie's better than me, but I think this is the first time they've given somebody such co-lead presence in a movie. Are there other examples of that I'm missing?
I can't think of another Bond movie, honestly. The M character was always just an ancillary character in the movie, right? I mean, there wasn't really much of a complex storyline, but M weaves through hero and villain of this entire movie. Her history running double O organization, the emotional ties she may have to some agents, and the sacrifice she has to make and have to live with. So you could see some of that raw emotion in her face in the way she played this character.
I'm going to say the most obvious thing in the world. Judi Dench is a very good actress. There's an amazing thing in her in this where she is restrained, but she gives you just enough in her words and her face that you do understand she cares. And it makes moments like when she tells the other agent at the beginning to take the shot, and of course, knowing Bond's at huge risk by her doing so, that it really hits you. Oh, it's not that M doesn't care about Bond, but M's going to do what she needs to do to complete this mission.
It's the sacrifice for the greater good, and that's not always easy, even if you have decades of experience making those decisions. So you can kind of see that emotion in there, and I think a lot of previous Bond movies, you never see that. So I found it interesting to your point that, like, they brought her up as maybe Bond's not the primary character here.
Well, I think there's always some argument that the good guy who dies in the end may well be the primary character in anything. And sorry, y'all, spoilers, but the fact that she dies in the end speaks to just how important she is to this story. That we are following her struggle at least as much as his.
When we talk about the broader timeline, I mean, this was in 2014, right? So, gosh,
I think
over
that's
10
right.
years. So over 10 years. And it's like a foreshadowing of the world changing around in reality as well, right? Like there's not the Cold War era of espionage is no longer. There's no centralized government really. It's in the ether. There's hacker groups that are hired to hit people by by other either terrorist organizations or governments, and it's a different world now. You could disrupt these public utilities of countries just by a click of a button, which is just not the same as you hijack a nuclear weapon and then you try to extort a country for money. Like that's not the scenario these days. So it's interesting that they say this is the archetype of Bond as a movie trying to fit into the modern world. The timing of it was very cool too.
There's something quietly terrifying when it's revealed that the explosion in MI6, they didn't plant any explosives. Like you said, they just got into the utility system and caused the explosion with the existing gas lines. And there's something really terrifying and very modern about the fact that they don't even need physical access to kill people.
And then also when you think of a character like Silva, there's not a binary goal. Like in a lot of the Bond movies, Doctor No, or they want to extort billions of dollars from the U.S. government or the U.K. government. They want to exert some sort of control or world dominance. That is not the case here. He's got revenge. There's other motives that are just unpredictable, right? It's not a binary thing he wants. You can't pay him off. It's a different world, right? And I think this goes back to what I also love about this movie. Q gives him Warther, like his handgun and a radio transmitter, and that's it. Like you're stripping down all the gadgets from like the Pierce Brosnan era, the laser guns and or the shark with laser beams on their freaking head. Like you're getting back to basics around that raw instinct and grit can still solve the issue and handle the villain and save the day. So I find it very interesting that like the old dogs, you could do old tricks and still win.
And there's a lot of that throughout the movie, but so significant that the Albert Finney character tells him sometimes the old ways are best, showing him the knife, and that he does ultimately kill Silva with that knife. Yeah, I don't think that's an accident.
Also, minimal CGI, a lot of like physical action, stunt people, like physical effects. It all plays into the themes of the movie. And you get to like the final arc of the movie and at Skyfall in Scotland, and it's like you think of Bond as a character development. You have like Shanghai with failure and modernity and isolation, going to Macau where it's surreal enemies and surreal threats. And then you go to like Scotland where it's raw, exposed, going back to his childhood and the open wounds that are there. I love how the whole thing is just such a package as a movie as far as character development, scene development, character arcs. Like it's just incredible.
But when you mentioned going to Skyfall, previous guest Julia Mott, who's my wife, I do a thing to her that really annoys her, that when the name of a movie comes up in a movie, I'll elbow her and go, "That's the title of the movie." The reason I mention that is this has one of the great introductions of the title in the scene where he's getting the psychiatric battery of tests and the word association, and the psychiatrist says to him, "Skyfall," and he just says, "Done." And we have no idea what Skyfall means at that point.
Yeah, it could be a code word for an operation that went wrong. Like you have no idea.
Yeah. I think that's our guess, right? But we're guessing that it's something job related. And so to find out later, oh, this is like the ancestral homestead of the Bond family. I just think that's such an interesting way to pull it in because now we're going, oh, wait, that's not just the title. What is Skyfall?
Yeah, exactly.
So you mentioned Silva as we move through kind of the three big characters here. Talk to me about Bardem's performance and about that character.
I was reading that they were really basing this character off multiple real life cyber criminals. Maybe not just anonymous, but the way the archetype, like it's so different from previous villains. And we talked about there's not a binary need. You can't solve this by giving them money. You can't solve this by seceding something to him. He's principle based. So how do you deal with a villain like that? How do you satiate what they're looking for? But he also had a vulnerability, like you felt sorry for him in a way. You could see how he got to this point, what he went through, abandonment, where it's like you could have then years of vengeance eating away at you, how you can turn into this.
You say he's principle based, and I get that. The real challenge is his primary principle is vengeance. So There's no way to satisfy vengeance unless you're going to let him avenge you, you know? It makes him that much more difficult to deal with.
Mm. How do you feel about, like, Javier's performance compared to other villains? I'm very curious, like, how you interpret it.
I love how over the top it is. I feel like in what is a gritty, grounded Bond movie in a lot of ways, we still need those touches that remind us that this is a James Bond movie. And I think a villain that over the top is a great one. I also find it impossible to watch him in this without thinking about Anton Chigurh in No Country for Old Men, who's a very different kind of eccentric, but very eccentric. Also shot by Roger Deakins, of course. Great Javier Bardem villain roles. But for me, it works. I can see where some people might bump on it though, and it might not
Mm.
work as well for them because I could see people saying it takes them out of the movie. Where do you fall on it?
I could see that argument, and I think there are aspects that are a little over the top, and I think there's one common thread with a lot of villains. There's injury, excessive deformity for some sort of trauma in the past, and almost every villain
Yes.
has that, and it's, like, tied to how they became who they are. So I think that's kind of a common thread you see.
And I love here how we first think it's psychological injury alone. The torture certainly, but like we think mainly what he's carrying is the psychological scars. And then in that incredible scene when he's in the weird plexiglass cell and he pulls like what is not just false teeth, but it's something like holding up one whole side of his face, and he pulls that out of his mouth, and he's suddenly this like horribly scarred individual. I just think it's such a telling and visual way. They talk about in film, show don't tell. Like it just gets you there visually in a way that his words, while incredible, but that his words can't on their own.
You could tell there's conflict in Judi Dench in her response because seeing that, and then she alludes to the story behind it. He was doing something on the side to hack the Chinese. They found out. So she made a deal to save 6 agents over 1, the greater good. So she made the best decision that she could at the time. So partially you could say, well, it's also his fault. He got into the situation where maybe she had no choice but to make that decision. So he signed his own fate.
And also, maybe the easy thing to do in this movie would have been, oh, he's a turncoat. But it's not that. Like, we feel more like he was striving to do more in his role. Now, probably shouldn't have done it the way he did it, right? So that's a little bit different thing than if it's like, oh, he's a traitor. Oh, he's a traitor would almost be too easy for this movie.
And I think it would go against the lot of the themes you see around it's a character focused movie. That's why it's like been so popular, Oscar winning and beyond the normal Bond movie. So I think you're right. It would be too simplistic. It'd be too boilerplate of a villain, right? Okay, he's an insider, former insider, turncoat, got turned by the enemy, and now he's coming back for revenge for whatever reason. And I think that's too I agree with you. I think it's too simplistic of a character to fit in this particular movie.
Now, here's something I thought about on this viewing, and I'm sure people have made this comparison before. There are a lot of ways in which this reminded me of Heath Ledger as the Joker.
Oh my God, yes. 100%.
I think one thing this movie does incredibly well is quote other movies and do it in a way where it doesn't feel derivative. It feels like it's kind of building on film history. But the wildness of this performance, the fact that we see he's disfigured and that playing into his tragic backstory, though, of course, with the Joker, we don't know which, if any, of his backstories are true, but we believe the trauma, right? I can't imagine that Bardem didn't look to that to some degree.
I didn't even think of that parallel or influence, but you could totally see that as far as taking a normal, pretty much normal person going through something like that, and they either persevere or get changed horribly because of it, and they turn into this monster at the end.
And interestingly, and I'd call the performances not as similar, but Bond is like the Batman in that, right? Like Bond's been through trauma and he came through it still probably a little messed up in the head, but on the side of good. So there's a very similar dynamic between the protagonist and the antagonist playing out here.
I've never considered those parallels, but yeah, I could totally see that.
All right, well, I got to go to something we can't miss here with you on as the guest. And so normally this might be more of a late in the interview topic, but with you, Barrett, we got to talk cars. And we have to start with the reveal of it's the DB5, right? I have that right?
It
The
is,
classic.
yeah, yeah.
And one thing that I noticed this time, I'm not 100% on this, but I am fairly sure that is the first time we really hear the full Bond theme. Because we've heard snippets of it throughout it's a great score. We've heard snippets of it before as he does big things. But man, we see that car in his storage space and we get that Bond theme. So talk to me about that car, about that scene.
It's one of my favorites because I mean, it's such a classic car and it is revered, right? Because I'm pretty sure you see it in Thunderball or Doctor No. It is certainly in Goldfinger, but it is so associated with that Bond character, espionage, worldwide mystery, right there. And hearing you write the classically scored theme. So here's back to basics Bond. Like here's old dog. Here is the old way of doing things going to his vulnerable childhood, right? And bringing M with him, who's also considered a quote unquote old dog, like old way of doing things. And yeah, seeing that car, it's such a fabulous car. And like it even has a little ejector button under the gear shift.
He uses that in Goldfinger, right? The
Yeah,
ejector seat.
he does. That really great car chase scene they have with like that old 1940s hearse or whatever it was. Goes over the cliff and bursts into flames. What did they have? Caskets full of jet fuel. And then also they at the beginning you'll see a Defender 130. So the 130 is the crew cab with the pickup truck bed. And 2014 was one of the last years they made the old Defender. So it's like also there's a lot of Jag Land Rover represented in a lot of Bond movies, so I always get a kick out of
Yes.
that. But the Aston is always a star.
In the first sequence, we get some great Land Rover action, right?
Yeah. It's smashing up cars, beating up Audis.
Let's talk a little bit about that cold open because, boy, this is a movie that just grabs you right from the word go.
Oh my
What's
god.
notable to you in that Istanbul sequence?
Well, I think for one, I don't know of any other Bond movie that's been set in Turkey. Do you know of any?
I don't know them like you do, so I'll say no, but that doesn't mean anything that I'm saying no. So
Yeah, and it's like I could be totally wrong, but I think as far as having such an incredibly gritty and non-CGI'd chase scene where you're hearing the crunch of like terracotta tiles on the roof and they're on motorcycles plowing through Grand Bazaar. It's so amazing and so raw and gritty, but then you're in an ancient city in Turkey. It has a lot of that building on theme, right, for the movie. But I think it's a fantastic chase scene. Absolutely love it. I think that opening scene just made me hooked to this film. You're in this place, there's someone riding on that motorcycle. There's someone actually doing this stunt. It pulls you in, the cinematography is so incredible. I mean, I think this is one of my favorite movies that Roger's ever done. We did Fargo, which also is one of my absolute favorite movies, but there's something in the way he shot this movie that draws you in so much. I don't know how to describe it.
another thing with this cold open I find really notable is it may not be every time, but normally the Bond cold open does not really relate directly to the plot. So I find myself kind of conditioned, oh, this is going to be fun, but it's not ultimately going to set the stakes for the movie. And this one is like, boom, here are the stakes. This is what you're going to be following for the next 2 hours. And James Bond might be dead.
Yeah. And this is the end. So it's like, I don't know how more I could be more direct I can be with you.
It's like, that was one of the best 15-minute movies I ever saw, and now I can just take off and go home.
It's like, what is this? This is like a Cannes Film Festival short? What's going on here?
It's such a bravura way to come into the movie and just sets everything we're going to see from there. It pulls some things that could be cheesy, like the Land Rover drives through like a food stand and one of the cars chasing them does that thing that when you think about it is an obvious ramp where like it goes up and goes over on its side. It's a car chase, it's a motorcycle chase, it's a fight on top of a train scene, which it's one of the greats of that kind of classic Hollywood trope.
I'm curious your thoughts on this, where he gets shot, M has to live with that, and then it ties back to the opener and say, "Okay, well, where the hell are they going with this?"
I think that is interesting that we see the mortality of this character so much throughout the Daniel Craig run. Maybe a little less so in Casino Royale, but certainly starting in this movie. And we even, I think, in this movie, see his own fascination with death. Like the drinking game with the scorpion is intense.
Mm.
And I don't want to say he has a death wish exactly, but he's certainly flirting with it.
And then you look at every one of the Bond movies, you go back to, like, Casino Royale, and he's in the torture scene where he's like, "Sometimes the simplest methods can be the most painful." And I think every one of us were squirming in the seat while watching that scene. But he has this, "Do whatever, I don't care." I think it's like flirting with death, he just doesn't care. Like, it happens, it happens, it doesn't, it doesn't.
And then with what we learn about his childhood, and we're not told exactly, but it sounds like his parents probably died in some sort of horrible accident or violent event because they died at the same time. This is a trauma-informed character, to use somewhat modern lingo. It's drawing from traumatic experience. I think we see that and feel that in every moment he's on screen,
Well, what's so
in this one.
interesting is, like, they seek out guys that have or, like, men that have gone through this. Like, they seek out, like, orphans, they seek out folks with traumatic childhoods that could then see the state or see M as that parent figure. And then that becomes the deep loyalty that they require to put your life on the line. So I was like,
So
I
you
always remember that as like, oh, he's an orphan. He's an orphan. That's what they pick when you're thinking about this type of MI6 job. Like,
Yeah.
you got to find the right type of person.
You just expanded my understanding of something. So I definitely clocked the orphan line, and I was thinking of that just as being about, well, they don't have parents, so they don't have as close of connections to need to sever. I don't know if this is ever in the series really completely described to us, but we certainly have the feel that the double O position is something above like secret agent for MI6. This is a special thing. They're assassins, among other things. But I had not thought about that besides there not having the connections, that M and MI6 are specifically feeding on that trauma and using that trauma response of these men as an important part of the grooming process, I guess.
When you look about like the loyalty he has for M, right? And what lengths he'll go to come and protect her. He could have, like, to Ralph's point, he could have stayed dead, lived off in some tropical island and retired, and then no one would have bothered him. The UK government wouldn't look for him. No enemy would look for him. But he didn't do that. He came back broken, alcoholic, because he knew that she needed him. But then you have Silva where the opposite can happen, right? That's when it can go wrong, and you can get such deep resentment that and vengeance that when you think about what really motivates a person, what's the hardest thing to accept? Being rejected by your family or being hurt by your family. That's so much worse than anything else. It shows that, hey, it could be effective as a tool and bond where you have the deepest loyalty where he'll sacrifice himself every single day for you and the state. And then the other side of the coin is that can also go very, very wrong.
I'm thinking of something else fairly specific as you say this. In that scene with the psychiatrist that we talked about briefly earlier, when the psychiatrist says country to him, he notably says England. He doesn't say the United Kingdom, and he is, in fact, apparently Scottish.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that he has been so subsumed by MI6 and the culture of England itself that he has rejected Scotland to some degree, because he could just as easily say United Kingdom there, right? Like, it would still be true. In fact, that is more true as to the country he's serving. But he very specifically says England.
That's such a great point that I completely missed during that like psychological exam. But you're right, like, didn't even mention Scotland, and then he says Skyfall, and he said, "Done." It's ripping out where is your past and say, all you care about is England and M, and that's it.
Yeah.
You know, your duty, getting the job done, and that is it. Your past does not matter. And what I
And the
found was
martini.
interesting, I was curious,
Go ahead.
Brad, too, when we were on the Scotland thing. I was reading that Ian Fleming changed the character in some of his next books to be Scottish because he was so impressed by Sean Connery's performance.
Oh,
And I
wow.
didn't realize that it was not from the plot line in his books. He changed it because he was so impressed with, like, Sean Connery's performance, which anyway, I thought it was an interesting side bit.
Somewhat famously, I think there was controversy at the time that Connery was cast because Bond was this English spy hero in the novels. Oh, it also was controversy because he was a male model and a bodybuilder, not really an actor yet at that point. And, that acting thing didn't really work out for Sean Connery in the end. He never went on to do anything, did he?
No, no, I mean, he was not very good. But, you're right, it was like a lot of classism around that time. He was not an upper class military academy going MI6, like what you would expect someone that would elevate from, like, Commander Bond in the military into the MI6. He was a working class guy from Scotland,
Yeah.
and that didn't fit the archetype that people in the '60s would think, the classism that existed in England at the time.
Because you mentioned that, I think that is an incredible thing about bringing in Albert Finney in the third act of the movie, because to my understanding, and obviously this is before my time and on a different continent, but Finney, along with Michael Caine, were kind of the first big working class English actors. Like as things converted out of a more traditional, like Shakespearean based England film scene, that Finney and Caine were the guys who talked with rough English accents. Of course, he's doing a Scottish accent in this one. So I was thinking about that with him being the game warden. We've got this gritty Bond, and here, like the one person from Bond's childhood, even though Bond grew up basically in a castle, the one person from his childhood is this gritty, down to earth guy played by the ultimate gritty, down to earth actor.
Love that, I thought that was such a great character, and then plays into that scene too, the rawness, the vulnerability. He's facing the most technologically adept villain that they've probably seen in a Bond movie with a sawed-off shotgun and a bunch of shotgun shells and shrapnel. That's it. And some dynamite that's just raw stuff that's sitting around the hunting lodge. And you need someone with grit that will just drop everything and put his life on the line to save you. And so it's such a interesting character, like, from his past to come back, right?
Yeah, I forget the exact line, but Bond says something trying to send him away, and it's like, no, that just ain't happening. He's here for the fight.
Yeah. It's the fight he's been
And
waiting for, you know?
yeah, you get a strong impression. He's got some glee about the whole thing. Like he understands their lives are at risk. He's taking it seriously, but he's like, I'm in my 70s or whatever it is. This is the fight I've been gearing up for my whole life. It's time for a siege.
Exactly. "What do you think? I've been bored up here. I'm ready to fight," It's like, need a little action.
And the fact that he's in the house, you almost feel like, has he just been waiting for Bond to return all these years?
"Dude, I've had dinner waiting for 25 years."
To make another Batman parallel, he's very much Albert too. He's not a butler, but he's this older badass guy from Bond's past that still loves him deeply.
Yeah. No, that's such a great call out.
He's Alfred. I just said Albert, but now what I'm going to do is say he's Alfred, and I'm going to edit it back in to the
There you go.
to where it sounded dumb.
It's a beauty of post-production.
So with Sam Mendes coming in as the director here, he had a history of very deliberate movies like Road to Perdition, Revolutionary Road, American Beauty, to a degree, I would call deliberate. And that's a strange choice for Bond, right? It's an action movie franchise. I mean, it's usually kind of go, go, go. But I was thinking about how much his patience combined with Deakins' patience really pays off here. Thinking about the things as simple as like the establishing shots of the city, we get these long, slow establishing shots of city done by like helicopter. We get a slow buildup. I mean, the whole thing, we think Bond's dead for a significant amount of time in this movie. I mean, obviously we know, but as an audience, we're buying into, at least emotionally, Bond being dead. And I feel like a more action-oriented filmmaker, or frankly, just a lesser filmmaker, because Bond unfortunately has a history of a lot of so-so directors. I think a lesser filmmaker would not have exercised that patience, would have felt like, oh, this is a Bond movie. We have to be going. It either has to be action or has to be funny. And that's not the case in this one.
And I'm trying to think some parallels with some of the directors with Mission Impossible, where some they wanted this film to be different. It was about characters. It was about the arc of those characters. It was about redemption from aging and obsolescence and still being of value. And having the scenery, having the lighting, having the shadowing, how does that all play in the entire story arc of the movie? And I think you're right, like, it's not simply just an action movie. So they needed someone a little different, someone that was going to produce the end goal. And that's why I think this movie was so good. The deep character development for M and seeing Bond as a human character, not as an invincible hero or the villain being so over the top that there's no way that could be true. Or CGI put in there for some fantastical explosion when you just need something really gritty and real to have an even bigger effect. But I think you're right, like,
Absolutely.
you need to get someone that sees that vision, that is able to be that focused and deliver a product like that.
And you mentioned some thematic stuff there. But it is one of those movies where it feels like almost every shot is playing on the themes of the movie, whether it's trauma, whether it's mortality, aging, vengeance. This movie's so thematically deep, but just some that come to mind. And it really feels like, especially in how deliberate it can be, that it's playing on those themes in every scene and every moment.
How do you see this as a typical Sam Mendes movie? I mean, do you see this as having some of the characterizations that like a thumbprint of his? Or do you see this as
Um,
something new, like, an expansion of what he's able to do?
I'm gonna cop out and say both. No, but I mean, that is a huge compliment. I think he's somebody who deals with trauma a lot. He deals with family dynamics. Mary, all 3 of those movies I mentioned deals later in the, excellent, 1917, deals with violence and, the cost of violence in a pretty incredible way. And that one, by the way, feels like he learned from this, where that one is in one sense all action because it's like an unbroken movie, but it, at the same time, is very aware of the horrors of World War I that it's depicting. I am a huge defender of American Beauty. It's a movie whose reputation has, dropped off some over the years, and obviously there's the problematic Spacey of it all, but I feel like he leveled up as a filmmaker here. Like, he took the things he was good at, and then he added a whole 'nother skill set to it, but without losing those things he was great at already.
Very cool. I don't think it's cop out at all.
One thing with his direction, and this goes to the script as well, and certainly to Deakins, is this movie is so meticulous about setups and payoffs. So, like, we see the knife, we get the line about the knife, he uses the knife to kill him. We see the Komodo dragons as he walks into the casino, and the Komodo dragons kill the bad guy. Are there other instances you see of that? And how do you see that as informing the movie and your view of the movie as a whole?
You have, like, his handgun and radio transmitter that Q hands him.
Great
I
one.
think it's another scene. But you have the unveiling of the DB5 Aston, and then he's using that to target practice for the enemy, but also to use its exorbitant firepower to actually do damage too.
Oh, what a
Yeah,
great point there, because they don't actually show us the guns on that until he uses them, but we know about that from older movies. So
for
it's like,
sure.
you talked about foreshadowing. It's another example of going back to the past and turning it into foreshadowing, retroactively.
Let me pull up this now 60-year-old car that can hold off the enemy for a little bit still, hold its weight still, be a diversion while they escape. And I think there's a lot of points in the movie, to your point, that exemplify that.
And I just think of it like as giving me satisfaction in a movie, little bursts of satisfaction in a movie that's challenging me in a lot of ways too. You can be tough in a Bond movie, but you don't want it to be an unrelenting slog. And I think those things help keep it from being a slog. Keeps the cast, at least the major speaking roles, fairly tight. The number of them, I think, in order to make sure they all have those moments. Like I wasn't even thinking about this until you mentioned characters, but we talked about the failure thing, and like each character has failure, but especially for the good guys, we see them each get redemption. Like Q has some things not work, but then he lays this amazing trap for Silva at the end. And M gets her hands dirty after being behind the desk for maybe her whole career. She's building those bombs basically in Skyfall. So I think again that's an element of things paying off here.
It's like a redemption story for everyone in the movie. Like Q realizes, like, I built these security protocol. I've built a lot of this technology. And then he's like, well, then ego brings you down. He's like, I should have thought about tapping the system. He knew exactly we were going to do that. Like he was playing chess 4 or 5 moves ahead of us. Silva wanted to get caught.
So let me ask you, I think this is an amazingly well-written movie on top of anything else. We've talked a lot about the plot mechanics, but I think on a dialogue level, it's an amazingly well-written movie too. And remember, we don't care about exact quotes here, so don't worry about nailing something exactly. But are there any lines or any dialogue exchanges that really hit you or stand out to you?
I think one of my favorite lines is when he's in the office with them after the physical. And he goes, the whole office goes up in smoke, and yet somehow that bloody thing survives. I think it's like a little bit of humor, but then also a little bit of personal jab. Like they have such a personal relationship that he knows he could jab her a little bit. Like there's some history behind that Union Jack bulldog, but then also when M dies at the end, he inherits it. That's the one thing that she gives to him. So it's such a great comic hook at the end. But that I
It
love that
is.
line.
It's yet another one of those payoff. This little like
Yeah,
throwaway item, as far as we know. Um,
totally. Or just
and of course,
a random item on a desk in a scene, but it does play along that here's how close they were emotionally and how much they were in a caring relationship. And
and then the bulldog being like a very resonant English symbol, especially like related to Winston Churchill. So it's got this extra weight of this is for England.
oh, totally, yeah. I mean, you can imagine the thing sitting on Churchill's desk,
Yes,
1942.
absolutely. Yeah, actually, yeah. M seems to have been around long enough that you wonder could it have been a gift from the man himself?
Who knows, right? You know?
There's something that M said that really struck me: the hell with dignity. And I think it's when Rafe Fiennes and Bond are both in her office with her. And that really struck me as saying something about this movie in relation to the rest of the Bond movies, because Bond movies are so about being suave and having this upper class feel and dignity. And that in that moment, M is like, fuck that. That's not what's important. What's important here is what we have in front of us and what we have to do to solve this situation by any means we can achieve.
And I think it's kind of the theme for the whole movie, right? It's the redemption for all these characters. And it's like the grit that they then take to solve the problem. And you think about it kind of carries across the redemption story for every one of those characters. You have Q going through with his breadcrumb trap for Silva. And you have M just coming off with a quote like that, of like, you just get to the raw basics and get the job
Yeah.
done. It's also like to your theme about Bulldog Union Jack, harken back to the era of like Churchill, keep calm and carry on. Like old English,
Yes.
just I see that picture in my mind too when I see that or hear that.
Yeah, and then I also think of the Churchill line, "When you're going through hell, keep going." And they very much do that in this movie. No, we're not stopping. And even tempting him to Skyfall is, oh, maybe we could try some way to divert this thing. But no, this is a fight about us and him. We're bringing him to us to end it.
Yeah, and there's no technology out here. It is rawness.
A little bit on the spot question. What's a non Craig Bond movie that you want to highlight for the audience that you'd recommend?
I think for sure Goldfinger. I think Thunderball is classic. I love Doctor No too. I mean, it's the first. There's some cheesy '60s movie aspects of it. I think those three for sure.
That's a pretty unimpeachable three.
I asked the stars.
That's it for this one, folks. I'm Brad Glazer. I host, produce, and edit the show. Thanks as always to the Brain Trust for their help, and of course, Julia Mott. Should I make a Spy Who Shagged Me joke here? I probably shouldn't, right? The music you hear at the beginning of the show and now is by my friend Richard Bates and his band The Huns. That's H-O-N-S. You can find The Huns music on Bandcamp. This Wednesday, we'll have Jeff Alizardi, a friend for over 30 years, coming at you to talk about Paul Thomas Anderson's The Master. The movie is dense and intense, and Jeff and I really wrestle with it, while having fun, of course. Jeff told me up front that he likes long episodes, and then he backed that up by providing a lot of amazing thoughts. So we're going to honor his wishes and contributions by letting it run. Please follow, rate, review, subscribe, tell your friends, all the things. You can follow us on Instagram at YourFavoriteFlick, on Letterboxd at FavoriteFlick, or shoot us an email at yourfavoriteflick@gmail.com. Huns, take us out.
Made crazy, stupid money for crazy, stupid things. Is that any part of keeping your heart? If I spent those same days brushing up on poetics, that's 14 times 365 inflection of I dearly love you.